So we cover a lot in this unit. We're going to cover basically the manifest destiny leading up to the Civil War, fighting the Civil War, and then trying to fix fighting the Civil War. So these are going to be broad strokes of a lot of stuff. And there's obviously going to be a lot more about these as we go into the unit, but these are some of the main things to be looking for in the trends over time. So starting with America and American and national identity. Americans deserve land and God will give it to us. This is our manifest destiny part. We truly do feel that God has destined us to acquire this huge swath of land from other people, other countries, but it's ours because God has given it to us. So there is this idea of American exceptionalism. We are exceptional because we're Americans. The Civil War is also going to tear the nation apart. So there is going to be a problem leading up to that, obviously, of what does it mean to be American? And instead it's going to be replaced with the huge emphasis on being from the South or being from the North. You have these regional issues, which are hinged upon slavery, as opposed to an idea of there's this broader American identity. And once we tear it apart, how does it go back together? What does it become to be an American once you've had to put the pieces back together of tearing yourself apart over really fighting over what it is to be an American? I'll be totally honest, we really haven't figured this one out. And so we'll talk about this in kind of each of our other units after this. What does it mean to be an American? We're having that conversation now in 2020. There's a lot of questions around, who is an American? What does it take to be an American? And a lot of those are hinged on a kind of political and cultural and social element. But what we're going to see coming out of the Civil War and during Reconstruction is going to be, do Black people who have been freed, are they Americans? Because if you're an American, you deserve the same thing as all other Americans. And what we're going to see is that not everyone who actually is an American is going to receive the same treatment. And so there is going to be, whether it's very conscious or subconscious or implicit, there is going to be an understanding that some people are disqualified from getting the same rights as other people. Politics and power. This is the ultimate showdown between the states and the federal government. I've mentioned this from the very beginning. We've been building to this moment. Where does the true power lie? Are we a federal government, the United States of America, or are we a bunch of states who work together if we have to? And the federal government wins. That's it. And that's the reality that you live in now. The true only reality that you've ever known in your lifetime is one that is the United States is a federal government. We just also have states that are a part of it. Reconstruction is going to attempt to bring political rights and power to African Americans, but it's going to be very controversial. There's going to be a lot of groups that try and fight back against that, so it's not going to be obvious or the obvious conclusion that should happen. And there are mixed results for this. We're going to see that in some aspects, yes, African Americans are going to get more power and maybe even closer to equal, but in a lot of other instances, we're going to see that that's actually not the case. And I do want to be clear, when I talk about politics and African Americans, I'm talking about men, women still not included in the politics and power. Ultimately, the South is going to acquire home rule, where they will take back control over themselves, and you're going to see the creation of the Jim Crow South. And so while there is officially no slavery, the politics and power in the South are going to go back to the wealthy white men who had it before. So you don't see a ton of change from that element. Work exchange and technology. There was a huge increase in the economy in the North during the war. Wars are really great for boosting your economy because you got to make stuff and the government's going to buy it. And that's going to be great for the North. The ending of slavery is going to shatter kind of the economic core of what the South had been, and really throw into chaos all of these well-oiled apparatuses that existed in the South's economy. The South is going to move into some industries, but it's also going to create ways to manage the new free labor population to get similar to results to what happened under slavery. So there is, once you get this kind of home rule idea, a wrestling back of economic power to what it had been instead of moving forward. And if we're being totally honest, the South is just now starting to get out of some of those economic ruts that they really put themselves into by utilizing slavery, focusing on slavery, and then trying to bring that manor back into existence when slavery ends. Culture and society. So there is going to be a change in the political view on race, but that doesn't really have an impact really economically or socially. You're going to see Jim Crow laws become created that will create a segregated society in the South, and racism is still prevalent in the North. So the notion that we've ended slavery and therefore things are all fine, that's not the reality that happens. While there is some movement politically, you see very limited movement socially and economically. And if we go even further into today's time, you see more progress socially, but maybe not as much progress economically. But we'll cover that when we get to the modern civil rights movement. Migration and settlement. Especially in the beginning parts of this unit, you're going to see huge flooding movements to fill out the continental United States, which we will add to our nation. There'll be mixing between native populations and Americans. The gold rush itself will attract both domestic and international audiences. The Oregon Trail will lead families out west, and there's also religious persecution. There's also persecution against immigrants, and there is kind of the issue that we always run into of everyone's competing over this. How does that have an impact on maybe the cultural aspects, right? Or the political aspects, or the economic aspects? Who is going to be the haves and the have-nots if there's a bunch of people competing in the same space? Geography and the environment. There is the discovery of gold and mining deposits, which will bring Americans west and will place a huge value on the land that we will take by leveraging our power. And that'll have a lot of significance around the building of the West and what it ultimately becomes, and also this immediate moment in time. America and the world. We will leverage our strength to acquire territory when it comes to filling out the continental United States. We use force, we use diplomatic means, but we are basically hell-bent on getting as much of this land as we can. And we will use all manners of foreign policy in order to do that. There is going to be some preventing of foreign countries from becoming involved in the Civil War, but really there's not much America in the world, as we're focused very heavily, especially in the tail part of the unit, on the Civil War, fighting ourselves, and then trying to fix ourselves during Reconstruction. Of all of the units we're going to talk about, this unit is one of the most significant. It also has some of the biggest long-term impacts on America. A lot of the stuff we're talking about in 2020, the power of the states versus the federal government, how should the government work and manage and restrict rights during times of crises? How can we work to try and utilize in a true equality and a true American dream for everyone? Those things that all came up in 2020 all hinge and go directly back to this unit in time. And so it's one of my most favorite to talk about just because it does have a huge impact on everything that comes after it. I'll also mention Eric Foner, the author of your book, Give Me Liberty, is a world-renowned historian on the Reconstruction era. And so pay attention to what he says. He is a huge expert in this. So when it comes to Reconstruction, there's a lot of good information about that.